This is John Martinka, and welcome to the Getting the Deal Done podcast. Today, my special guest is Sean Grace with Peak Luma. Sean is outside, or right in, I guess, center of Philadelphia, and the author of The Art of the Question, which is a fascinating topic. People don't ask enough questions, and sounds like you're a leader on changing that. So,
Mm.
what drove you to write this book?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, John. The book really came out of a workshop I had created about 6 years ago called "The Art of the Question," and that workshop really came out of a demand from my other communication workshops regarding questioning as a process. And after a while, I said maybe this deserves its own dedicated workshop. So I put together that and then ran the workshop for many years. I continue to run it. And as a result of a couple of hundred people running through it and getting feedback and refining the content and the learning and the material and the concepts, I felt, wow, I have a lot here that maybe I should at one point turn into a book. After several hundred pages of notes and other things, I decided, let me sit down and put this together. However, that task was a lot more difficult than I anticipated. So it took a lot longer, and it was more treacherous in a lot of ways to put together a book that a lot of people could have access to, and covers the number of topics that it does, but in both a sort of an educational as well as narrative context. So that was a real challenge, but an incredible learning experience. And so far, the reaction has been pretty positive. So it's called The Art of the Question, a guide for seekers, dreamers, problem solvers, and leaders. And the slug is better decisions, deeper connections, breakthrough ideas. And that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. So I noticed that, you talk about leaders and the difference between leadership, management, and coaching. Why don't we go into that a little bit?
Right. In the past, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between management and leadership, at least in a lot of sort of corporate culture for a lot of the last, maybe a generation or so. That's, of course, changed with the idea that, management is more focused on process, leadership is more about inspiration and vision. And I think not all managers are leaders, but hopefully all leaders are able to certainly manage as well. So there's a different mindset there. And then there's the coaching aspect, which sort of takes the leadership idea and puts it in a more practical feedback loop, whereas leadership certainly also entails that one-on-one communication, but it's more about vision and it's more about inspiration and strategy, whereas coaching is more about directed learning and directed feedback, and management is more about mechanical processes that are focused on results and focused on efficiencies. So I think you can the ideal manager has all those abilities, right? The ability to coach one-on-one with their various direct reports. They're able to also create an inspiring vision and lead with smart strategy and show by example, as well as being able to manage P&L and other aspects of managing a results process that's focused on delivering results, which is, at the end of the day, certainly what management is supposed to deliver. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I distinguish those three, and they are distinctive skill sets. And leadership, I think, is the common denominator that I think could sort of define better management as well as great coaching. So I think there's the more common thread, but each of them have specific methodologies and processes and different motivations, if
It,
that makes sense.
it makes sense. So the coaching we're talking about is someone in leadership or management coaching their people to be able to elevate versus the coaching you or I or others would do from the outside, or and I guess both.
I think it's both. When I think of coaching, I also think of goals. I think of the coach is, and it is more one-on-one relationship when I think of coaching. It doesn't mean it can't be one on many, but I do think of it as a more of a one-on-one, directed, dynamic. Managing, I think, is more one to many, and leadership is one to many. But all of these things are fluid, and I don't think there's so one dominates necessarily the other.
Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, that's my thought on that.
Okay. So the art of the question and what makes a good question?
Mm. Well, I guess it depends on what your goal is. Uh, Great questions could also just be part of terrific communication, where a lively conversation is often seeded with great questions, both rhetorical as well as clarifying, as well as probing. Um, and so, it depends on the context. If you're problem solving and it's more directed, then your questioning is more deductive, as opposed to maybe an inductive process. So when you're deducing a known potential answer to something, your questions are going to be much more deductive oriented. Um, if you're looking to create something and be innovative, your questions turn into a completely different thing, right? So a great question is how might we, or what if? And those questions open up more of the divergent process in our minds as far as exploring ideas versus the more convergent process, say in an inductive reasoning process like problem solving, where you're very focused. Now, it doesn't mean that creativity isn't problem solving. They're all problem solving, but it depends on the direction of it. You're looking to innovate and create, or you're looking to get to a known solution that you just have to kind of deduce to get to. So I guess it depends. What's a great question? What do you think is a great question?
Oh, I can drive especially my family members nuts by asking why.
Mm.
Why and why not?
Mm-hmm. Why is a powerful question? Yeah. There are problems with why, but why is a very powerful interrogative. Where it can come into problems is with interpersonal communication, where you tend to maybe use why as a as an indirect way of accusing, or it could be perceived that way, right? Why is the house always a mess? Why do you always do it this way? Where you could create a defensive reaction, right? However, why is the fundamental question we ask about purpose and about mission. Why we get up in the morning and why we do what we do. So very powerful. Yet when it comes to humans and people to people, sometimes it could pose some dangers.
You're
Do
right.
you
I
agree?
agree. It's, in a simple term, someone says, well, I think we should go to the park this afternoon. Well, why? Why would we go to the park instead of going to uh, the beach kind of thing?
Hmm.
But I can see where
Hmm.
your point when it's why do you keep doing it that way? It takes on a aggressive tone. So
Yeah, and I learned many years ago in the world of interpersonal communication that substituting how with why is often more prescriptive. So if someone says to me, let's go to the park, instead of saying why, you might say, well, how about we consider going to the beach?
hmm
Or how about we start at the park and then go to the beach?
yeah.
There's also a rule in the world of improvisation that's called the rule of agreement, where we build on each other's ideas instead of shooting them down or completely shifting the direction. Now there are times for that too, but so for instance, why don't we go to the park? Yes, and we could also consider going to the beach.
Yeah. So, when you talk about the art of the question, I run into people and they always say, well, I'm not good at sales. And, they confuse that with, the image of the old used car salesperson. And, I like to say good salespeople are good questioners. Uh, let's talk about that for a minute or two. When you get in with
Well,
these people and
that's
they're selling to, as Daniel Pink says in his book, to sell is human. Uh,
yeah,
it's, we're all selling to someone at some point.
yeah. Well, I certainly my first exposure to serious questioning was in the world of sales. So when I was studying sales as a young man, just out of college, I learned quickly that questioning was a very powerful element in the selling process. I discovered that it's a magic in the role of discovery itself, being able to determine needs, to be able to assess pain points and problems by asking efficient questions, especially when you have limited time. So you have to get good at asking questions that get to the point and get to, of course, hopefully where you want to get it to. So I also understood the manipulative aspect of questioning, from leading questions and things like that. So I saw the power on the persuasion side of where questions come from and how they can be used to manipulate psychologically. So it also elevated my appreciation for the power of them. So yeah, selling without good questions, I believe, it's going to take you a whole lot longer to make progress in the world of sales. I
Yeah,
think
you won't know
it's
what
a
problem you're,
fundamental skill.
yeah, you won't know what problem you're trying to solve.
That's right. And a lot of times the client or the prospect doesn't know what problem they have or need to solve either. So great questioning is not only just for your benefit, it's primarily for the power of reflecting back to the person that you're talking to have them reframe how they might see their situation. So it's both a part of knowledge attained for yourself as a salesperson, but I think more importantly, as a tool of reflection and introspection on the other person's part to see if there's a different way to look at something.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to your book, Sean.
Yeah.
Uh, it's got three sections, in simple terms, about knowledge, interpersonal, and innovation. Let's talk about the three sections briefly.
Yeah, the way I laid the book out was let's look at these three big aspects of where questions come in. But let's start with the foundations. This first chapter is called curiosity. Right, where do we get our sense of curiosity and our need or our want and our wish to ask questions and our sense of inquiry and how that changes from childhood into adulthood. And I dip a little into the great philosophers who kind of created the first frameworks for questioning. Those would be Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and which led to the Socratic method of questioning with Socrates, and eventually the scientific method of questioning when it came to Aristotle. And then I move into sort of the idea of knowing yourself, that sort of from a leadership standpoint and just from a self-awareness standpoint, a mindfulness standpoint. So we get into that. And then I get into a little bit of critical thinking as to how to be able to navigate knowledge and be able to use some frameworks to ask the right questions to understand what's real and what's not. Then I move into the world of people communication and starting with listening, which is the most important skill. And then I get into other areas like conflict resolution, persuasion and negotiation, and things around relationships, parenting, and such like that. And then I end the book with a whole section on creative collaboration, creative thinking, creative problem solving, and especially innovation. So how questions play a role in all of those vital aspects of creative thinking and innovating and problem solving in a more creative way. So that's sort of the sum of it all with the common thread of the art of the question.
Okay. So I'm the kind of person who learns by doing examples. Give us an example of, you know, your what you've written about, how it's worked with people.
Mm. Well, I have a model called the three-phase model that I created many years. Actually, I created it when I was first in sales. I kind of sketched out this thing called the three-phase model, and it essentially breaks down how one would be create a strategic framework or process for questioning. And it could be used in sales, or it could be used in interpersonal relationships, problem solving, or well, mostly with people, and or conflict resolution. So the three-phase model starts with you discover, and that's probe, elicit, and clarify. And the second was challenge, where you challenge assumptions, kind of inspire reflection and reframing. And then your final phase is infer, which is where you hypothesize, conclude, and create next steps. And it's sort of a funnel, if you want to look at it that way, or a pyramid, and upside down. So that model, I started teaching, when I started this course about 6 years ago, and certainly that is something that tends to feed back to me over time. That's a very helpful tool in other things, and that's also applied to job interviewing, or having a conversation regarding a promotion request. So I have several methodologies and models that you could use in order to better navigate these, sometimes difficult conversations from a standpoint of questioning. So that's one thing.
Oh, I get it. I'm going to shameless plug for myself. I've got a new book coming out called Exit with Style, Grace, and More Money. And there's in one of the chapters, there's for business owners slash sellers. Here's a list of questions you will want to ask potential buyers. And it's broken into categories depending on the type of buyer. And here's a list of questions a good buyer will ask you that you should be prepared for. Because if I'm working with someone and they're buying or selling a business, it's, the people who ask the good questions get taken seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, well, it's a sign of good critical thinking and good strategic thinking as well.
So let's digress a bit and talk about the kind of work you do. What kind of clients, the size of company, any industry, any level of people within that company that you work with.
Yeah, well, for the past few years, I would say the majority of the work that I'm doing is in the in-person workshops for large STEM companies. So people in, sort of the biopharma arena, as well as the medical device arena, robotics, and other areas such as that. And it's a combination between management, who are leading teams of anywhere from 7 to 15 direct reports plus, as well as I work with leadership development programs for young, high potential employees who are looking to be groomed to be better communicators, better problem solvers, better creative thinkers. So it's a combination of those those types of clientele, and they're typically not huge workshops, but anywhere from 15 to 30 participants. I also do a fair amount of virtual, but I would say these days I'm doing more in person, which I think has more impact. But certainly some of the global clients, where they have lots of employees around the world in different time zones, that doesn't make a lot of sense to bring everybody together for this. So we typically do a series of virtual workshops. So that's the kind of work that, and in addition to that, with Grace Media Works, I also do video production work that's related also to some of the same clients, where they're looking to market, or they're looking to produce training material, or internal communications work.
Okay. Any final points you would like to make, and then share how people can get hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, The Art of the Question, now available at Amazon.com. The subtitle is A Guide for Seekers, Dreamers, Problem Solvers, and Leaders. And you can reach me through my website, peakluma.com. And Peak Luma basically is the metaphor for what we do here, which is sort of elevate, reach your peak potential, while also really bringing out the brightest light within you, and as well as bringing you some enlightenment. So it's all of those ideas put together. Peak, Luma, basically, leadership development at its best. So that's how to reach me, or through Grace Media Works as well. But Peak Luma may be a more direct way to go.
Yeah, Peak Luma, your book is on Amazon. I thank you for being here, Sean. Interesting. I mean, I can just tell you there's so much need for uh, what you do for, people in, whether it's leadership or management or trying to get into leadership and management. And, questioning if you don't know what the obstacles are, how do you overcome them? And you find out what they are by asking a question or
That's
two
right.
or three.
For
Thank you.
sure. Thank you, John.